Educational Communications and this station present Environmental Directions with Nancy Pearlman. On this series, we explore the effects of human influence on the Earth's ecosystems and discuss solutions to environmental problems which affect the quality of life on this planet. Environmental Directions gives you the kind of information you need to help you participate in decisions impacting your community, the nation, and the world. Now, here's your host, Nancy Pearlman.
Hello. For the next half hour, we're going to be talking about the Santa Rosa and San Jacinto Mountains National Monument and the surrounding area. My first guest is John Purcell. He is Executive Director of Friends of the Desert Mountains. He's a lifelong area resident, conservationist, and environmentalist. Welcome. It's a pleasure to have you with us.
Thank you, Nancy. It's great to be here.
We are actually in Palm Desert near Palm Springs. I just drove down from Idlewild at 5,000 feet. We're at 1,000 feet, but we can both look up at San Jacinto Mountains at 10,850 feet. This is a big area with a lot of different ecosystems, desert to the mountain, pine, oak community. Could you tell us what is incorporated in your sphere of interest?
Nancy, Friends of the Desert Mountains is the area's land conservation organization. Our sphere is the 1.2 million acre Coachella Valley. The Coachella Valley runs from the second lowest spot in two continents. We're about 233 feet below sea level down by the Salton Sea, up to, as you said, the top of Santa Rosa, the second tallest peak in Southern California, 10,850 feet. So we've got a very diverse life zone system here. As you'll hear later, we've got many endangered species, critical species, and species that we need to observe and make sure that they're protected into the future.
And outside of your visitor center here is the bighorn sheep. Now, am I going to get to see it live?
You just might. We've had a lot of sightings recently of bighorn sheep. The Santa Rosa Mountains is home to our area's largest endangered species, the peninsular bighorn sheep that extend all the way from the San Jacintos down to the tip of Baja, California. So with some luck, you might just spot some.
But you have been working on the Coachella Valley's multiple species habitat conservation plan because there are literally hundreds of different animals and plants, very rare and endangered, from rodents to the mammals, birds, plants. What are some of these unique ecosystem requirements that you have to work to preserve and protect?
In addition to having some of the most beautiful landscape in the western states, we also have some of the most valuable real estate. So how does one partner valuable real estate with the need to protect the species? The Endangered Species Act requires protection. So this valley was wise enough to form a partnership between conservationists and the Building Industry Association. Both of the organizations recognized that there had to be a better way of both protecting species and allowing for intelligent development. And out of that partnership, back probably 15 to 20 years ago, came the Coachella Valley Multiple Species Habitat Conservation Plan, one of the first multiple species plans in the nation.
In addition to the Coachella Valley, you have the species in the National Monument. And I remember the battles to save the San Jacinto Mountains wilderness, which belonged to the Forest Service and also state parks. Then you also have on the east side of the mountains the Bureau of Land Management land. And as I drove here, I passed through the Santa Rosa Indian Reservation. So you have a lot of different governmental agencies to contend with.
We do. We have everything from state parks to, as you pointed out, wilderness areas, U.S. Forest Service, BLM land, a national monument, and on the east side of our valley, of course, we have Joshua Tree National Park. So this plan is a beautiful partnership between all of those agencies as well as the local cities, and it is basically a plan that requires purchase of conservation land that is linked together to provide better conservation for all of the species, freeing up other land that can be used for development.
This linking is so critical. We often talk about wildlife corridors because you can't just have isolated pockets that are protected because the animals don't read the boundary signs. They need to move through a large territory, and you have to make sure that the wildlands are connected.
If you were to talk to biologists about critical areas in the contiguous 48, the Coachella Valley is one of the most biologically diverse areas that you'll spot. But the biologists would also say that the habitat corridors that you talked about, there are two of them in this area that are absolutely vital. We talked about the peninsular bighorn sheep that extend all the way down to the tip of Baja. Right at the mouth of the Coachella Valley is a very large pass, and on the north side of that pass are a range of mountains called the Transverse Range. That range connects directly to the Sierra Nevada and connects directly to the Cascades, so you could conceivably have genetic transference just through the little narrow pass at the mouth of the Coachella Valley for habitat corridor, and that's one of the focal points that Friends of the Desert Mountains has made for our land acquisitions.
South is the Anza Borrego State Desert Park. Are the animals moving back and forth?
They are, south to north, north to south, and obviously east to west. We've also got the Salton Sea, and to the east of the Salton Sea is an area where there are two wilderness areas, the Mecca Hills and Oricopia Mountains. And so we are basically now we have a corridor of conservation, a ring of pearls, as we like to say, set up so that all of the species in the area can be studied and are being studied and monitored so we can assure their survival and the beautiful aspects of the Coachella Valley.
Let's talk about the creation of the monument, because that was a long legislative battle in Congress. It wasn't easy. Some of the wilderness in the high San Jacinto Mountains was protected, but not the Santa Rosa Mountains. And I drove through Garner Valley, came down the scenic Highway 74, and saw the division between the two mountains. Is that an arbitrary division, or is it really real, ecosystem-wise?
Well, geologically, it's separated by a small fault and a watershed, the Palm Canyon watershed. The creation of the National Monument, and several of the board members of the organization that I'm privileged to run, were involved not only in the establishment of the National Monument, but prior to that, the establishment of the area as a national scenic area. So it was a multi-step, long-term effort to get the National Monument established. One of the unique features of our National Monument is that it was created bipartisanly. Most of the national monuments across the country, the vast majority as a matter of fact, are created by the stroke of an outgoing president's pen. It was important for the locals to feel that they had established this monument themselves. And so then Congressman Mary Bono Mack was adamant that Congress unite to create this national monument, which they did in the year 2000.
What is the relationship between the monument and the Coachella Valley? Because in the valley there are a lot of different cities. There's the Riverside County. There are different entities. How do they all work together?
Another unique feature of our national monument is it's co-managed itself by BLM and U.S. Forest Service, one of the only national monuments that is managed that way simply because of the geography, below sea level to 10,800 feet plus. The partnership of this national monument, 280,000-acre national monument, it's a part of this multiple species habitat conservation plan as well. So it partners and contributes land, conservation land set aside in perpetuity for the plan. The local cities also contribute by acquiring conservation land, setting that aside, along with the county of Riverside. And then there's that aspect that we're proud to play a part of, local nonprofit conservation organizations. Friends of the Desert Mountains to date has either directly acquired or played a significant role in the acquisition of over 50,000 acres of conservation land that will be held for the benefit of all, including the species, as we move forward.
In other words, you as a nonprofit organization work with private entities to acquire, either purchase or get donated lands that then are donated to the governmental agencies responsible for keeping the lands open to the public?
Either donated or sold. Fortunately, when the Endangered Species Act was passed, there was a law in place called the Land and Water Conservation Fund. Some smart people back in the 1960s, when oil and gas revenues were starting to flow out of the Gulf of Mexico, recognized that it was a resource that belonged to the people of the United States that was being depleted. So a portion of those revenues are now set aside every year to acquire another resource to belong to the people of the United States, in this case conservation land, and that is one of the major ways that the Endangered Species Act gets funded. So we have endangered species. We can acquire monies from the federal government, not through tax dollars, but rather through land and water conservation funds that are used to acquire lands that we're able to pick up because we're a nonprofit. We can move quickly and swiftly and get land when it's available rather than wait for the bureaucratic process to take place.
Even if one can't identify all the plants that one sees or the animals that one might encounter, everyone can enjoy the gorgeous views. And I find the variety from desert to mountains or mountains to desert, whichever way you happen to be going, incredible. The ridges, the peaks, the rock formations. Tell us a little bit about how you would describe it.
I am so lucky. I was born and raised here in the valley, and I grew up right at the foot of the San Jacinto Mountains. So all of my childhood and young adulthood was spent hiking and camping in and throughout the Coachella Valley. We have some of the most beautiful landscapes in all of the country, from mountain peaks to vast desert stretches. The Coachella Valley was once home to the largest sand dune system in the state of California. Unfortunately, now we're down to about 4% of that sand dune system, but that 4% is being preserved and managed so that the endangered species and the beautiful plants and animals that live there can be seen and enjoyed by all of us. So the fathers of all of the cities and the communities here were wise enough to keep development out of the mountains. And Friends of the Desert Mountains, one of our viewpoints or one of our focal points is to make sure that the landscapes that you see when you come here are preserved in perpetuity.
Every curve on the road as I came down the mountain had a different view. I just kept wanting to stop and enjoy and absorb because they were gorgeous. And the skies, the clouds, even though it wasn't raining, beautiful clouds, beautiful sky. And of course, at night, you can see the stars.
It is true. You can see the stars. We're lucky in that way. The valley only is home to about 400,000 people for 1.2 million acres. So I won't say we're sparsely populated, but we're fortunately populated. And if we do a good job of preserving what we have here, this area will be available for all of us into the future.
I like your name tag on your desk. You're a professor of interesting stuff. So tell us a couple of the interesting stuff that really appeals to you that you want to share.
I've always had a passion for natural science, and I think it's because of that passion that I've been fortunate to find a group of friends, a group of biologists and botanists, many of whom were instrumental in the writing and the crafting of the multiple species plan. We formed a loose group of traveling friends that would wander out into the deserts and down into the Baja Peninsula and up into the mountains. And invariably, I would ask them questions. So when I was able, on the rare occasion, to come up with a correct identification or make a significant find, they would all marvel, and it was wonderful because I wasn't expected to know anything. So one of my friends awarded me the plaque of Professor of Interesting Stuff, which I treasure and sits on my desk, as you said.
There are many, many trails in the area. One can walk, one can hike. Even if you're not going to do the 2,000 miles from Mexico to Canada, you can stop and walk a few feet, few miles, whatever you want on the Pacific Crest Trail.
That's true. The National Monument itself has over 300 miles of trails, and as you correctly pointed out, one of those trails is the first National Scenic Trail, the Pacific Crest Trail, that runs 2,650 miles from the border of Mexico to the border of Canada. It also is one of the toughest parts of the whole trail, going from Highway 74 all the way to Interstate 10. So if any of you out there are thinking about doing that hike, be prepared, because you'll see some absolutely beautiful country, but it's going to be a stiff walk.
And there's a lot of cultural history here as well as natural history.
That's true. The local Indians, we live in what we call what's referred to as Cahuilla Nation. The Cahuilla Nation was traditionally about 1.6 million acres. It encompassed the entire Coachella Valley and reached out towards the west to an area called Anza and Hemet. Many of you might have heard of the book Ramona by Helen Hunt Jackson. That took place in our local area here. So while the local Cahuilla would say that they have been here forever, archaeologists and anthropologists can date early man sites back about 4,000 years down by what is now the Salton Sea in what was an ephemeral lake called Ancient Lake Cahuilla. So the cultural history here goes deep and is still vibrant and alive.
This is a beautiful area. There's so much to see, so much to enjoy. It's about 2.5 hours from Los Angeles, about 2.5 hours from San Diego. One can stay in the mountains in Idlewild or in the desert in Palm Springs or Palm Desert, can camp out in any of the state parks or the county park grounds or the Forest Service lands. There's a lot to see and do. What do you recommend?
Well, I'm a hiker. I'm a backpacker. So all of the hikes that we have down here are magnificent. I would recommend the Indian Canyons, owned and managed by our partners, the Agua Caliente Band of Cahuilla Indians. They are some of the most beautiful canyons to be found in Southern California. To the east of our valley, the Mecca Hills and Orocopia Mountains have their own majesty. You know, Nancy, there's a reason why the three great Western religions all sprung from the desert. The desert has a magic to it, and we have some of the most beautiful desert that you can find. So anywhere you happen to go, but hiking has to be my favorite.
And next to those deserts are the mountains that I so much love. There's so much to enjoy in the Santa Rosa Mountains, the San Jacinto Mountains, the Coachella Valley. I'd like to thank you so very much for working to preserve and protect this area for all of us. Thank you for being my guest.
Thank you, Nancy, very much.
I have been speaking with John Purcell, who is Executive Director of Friends of the Desert Mountains. We'll be back in a moment with more ecological issues.
Environmental Directions with Nancy Pearlman continues with further discussion of the world's critical ecological issues. For more information, you may call 310-559-9160 or go to www.ecoprojects.org. Now, here's Nancy.
My next guest is Ada Nuckels. She is the lead volunteer coordinator for Friends of the Desert Mountains. Welcome. It's a pleasure to have you with us.
Hello.
You are involved in coordinating volunteers to help support the Santa Rosa and San Jacinto Mountains National Monument and to provide everything from hiking programs to land monitoring, education, visitor services. What do all your volunteers really do?
Our volunteers do many different things. We have our hiking program, which is an interpretive hike during our season of October through April every year. We lead hikes on Thursdays and Saturdays out of the visitor center here. And we talk about the plants, the ecology, and the geology, the water sources, whatever people can ask us about.
Even though I love to take long hikes, few miles by myself just to enjoy and absorb the mountains, it's also nice to take a nature walk or hike with somebody who can tell me what I'm looking at and give me some background in history. So what are some of the most interesting aspects of the area that visitors find most interesting?
Most of them ask us about the geology of the Carrizo Canyon when that is open, our 3 months every year of October, November, and December, because it is such a geology type structure in the canyon. We also talk about the bighorn sheep. We talk about our endangered desert tortoise. We talk about the plants. And last year, because of all the work that the weed warriors had done in Carrizo Canyon for the previous 3 years, we actually had wildflowers growing for the first time in the fall of the year because we had cleaned up the canyon.
It must be very satisfying for the volunteers to see that the wildlife came back because of their work. And when you say weed warriors, basically you had to remove exotic plants that probably flew in from the gardens and lawns of Palm Springs, Palm Desert.
Yes, exactly. The biggest problem that we had in that canyon was a plant called fountain grass. It's very beautiful. It was brought in by the gardeners and planted, and it is transmitted by wind-blown seeds, and each spike of flowers has 1,000 seeds or so in it. And it takes root and grows in the canyon walls way up high on the rocks. Some of them we can't get to, but it also had taken over the entire canyon floor. And we actually pulled out over 550-some gallon bags of plant removal.
This desert region is gorgeous in the springtime when the wildflowers do come out. It just carpets whole hillsides, thousands of feet. What are some of the plants that one would see?
We saw last year the rock daisy was blooming everywhere. We saw the Jimson weed that had come back, which provides food to certain small critters, mammals. We had a new plant come in. It was a trailing vine, and we had seen the sphinx moth when it was in the caterpillar stage, and it was eating all the flowers. So it was really great to see that plant come back for the wildlife.
Usually when one goes hiking in either the desert or the mountains, because this region has thousands of feet that go very, very high, it's wise to stay on the trail. You don't want to ruin the native species, and one needs to protect oneself. But those trails have to be maintained. They just don't get there automatically. They have to be built and made sure that they're not getting eroded, that plants aren't falling over on them. So that's a lot of work too.
Yes. We have what we call our Trail Stewards and Ambassador program. Our Trail Stewards go out and they will cut back branches that grow on the trail so that the trails can remain clear. They line the trail so that there is a way for you to know that you're actually on the trail. We put up signs indicating where the trail goes. We do graffiti removal that is out on the trails. We had one of our trails got washed out last year because of the floodwaters coming down from the mountains, and they spent approximately 5 work days out there with about 30 people each time, and it was mostly rocks that had bouldered down and washed out the trail. So they worked on that. Our trail ambassadors kind of adopt a trail, and they go out and make sure they pick up the trash on a weekly basis or a monthly basis, something like that. They talk to visitors on the trail and educate them about the national monument, where it's located, where the trails are, and whatever people can ask.
I'd like to publicly thank you very much for maintaining the trails, because I use them, I enjoy them. I don't like to have to go out and work on them. I just want to have fun on them. But I also try to be a responsible hiker. Take out what I take in. We shouldn't be trashing. And every visitor to our natural areas should practice that. You have a lot of education to do for those who aren't generally backpackers and wilderness hikers. But you also have to do some land monitoring. What does that entail?
Our land monitoring is, as Friends of the Desert Mountains seeks out land to protect and make it not accessible, we sometimes transfer the lands to other organizations to help. And so we go out and check the property before it's purchased to make sure that it's clear. Then after they purchase the property, we go back out on an annual basis and maintain the land and pick up trash and stuff and provide work days for our trail stewards and all volunteers to go out and help. We may make it a public lands day to clear trash that people have left out or used as a dump site.
The Santa Rosa and San Jacinto Mountains National Monument goes from the Coachella Valley at about 1,000 feet up to San Jacinto Peak at 10,800 plus feet. There's Tahquitz Peak around 8,000 feet. Lots of other peaks, lots of other places that one can hike, enjoy, and love. Most of that monument is managed by either the United States Forest Service or the United States Bureau of Land Management. You are part of a nonprofit organization to support them. Is that because our taxpayer dollars simply does not provide enough money for rangers and naturalists?
Absolutely. I started volunteering approximately 4 years ago because of federal tax cuts. We now only have 2 people assigned to work at the visitor center here in the National Monument, whereas we used to have 5 people. And tax dollars have been cut, and we don't have anyone to do the work. So our volunteers during the season help to keep the visitor center open 7 days a week. We have someone there every day helping our one paid employee that works in the visitor center.
And what's so nice at the visitor center is you can see the models, the maps. You can acquire all sorts of information, booklets, literature. There are incredible videos to watch, so if you can't go to every single part of the monument, you can see what you might be missing, get more background. There are displays of the animals and the plants, naturalist programs that you conduct. So much. It's worth a visit by itself.
Absolutely. And we have our education programs that go out. In addition to, we have public lectures that we give by several different people. We do the earthquake lecture that explains how the formation of the area came about and how earthquakes have affected the National Monument in the Coachella Valley.
And they're still affecting it.
We have earthquakes daily around here, but we also have lectures that talk about the various animals and plants in the environment, the life zones. We help our children in the recreation department every summer. We have requests from high schools to bring students out to go hiking, to learn about what volunteerism is. We do that, and we have done it for 5 years now, so it's a lot of things that we do in the education department for the public.
And people certainly should volunteer their time because it's very rewarding. You can also volunteer as a citizen scientist. You can actually help the researchers go and gather data, whether or not it's archaeological or botanical or biological or geological.
Yes, our citizen science projects we started a couple of years ago when we were helping one of our naturalists to do surveys on the western yellow bat. And we went out for 6 months every night, and we did it during the summer months when it was very hot. But we also are doing a project with pinyon pine survey to see what global warming is doing to the pinyon pines in our area, whether we have new growth or not. We have just completed helping with a project on water sources within the National Monument. Are they there? Are they still there? Have we gotten new ones that have not been documented in the past? And as they did the water surveys, if they came across areas, they cleaned out some of the water sources so that the wildlife would have water to drink through the summer months.
You obviously have shown that volunteering can encompass a wide range of activities and is so important to our natural resources and for people to be able to enjoy our natural areas. And I'd like to thank you so very much for your good work, and thank you for being my guest.
Thank you very much for inviting us.
I have been speaking with Ada Nuckels, who is lead volunteer coordinator for Friends of the Desert Mountains. I'm Nancy Pearlman. Thank you very much for joining us, and do tune in again next week.
If you would like free information about these environmental issues, go to www.ecoprojects.org or call 310-559-9160. Environmental Directions with your host, Nancy Pearlman, is a community affairs program of the nonprofit organization Educational Communications and this station.